have Leon Taylor, Master Sergeant, United States Air Force, retired with over 20 years of experience, also a retired Baltimore police officer. And we have Officer Brandon Tatum, a former member of SWAT, CEO of 3 companies, and he is known for his YouTube channel talking about police conduct. Gentlemen, thank you both for being on the program.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, here's what I want to do. Officer Tatum, you have taken the position that this police officer is justified. I would like you to explain your position, then I'm going to go to our other panelists for their opinion. What say you?
All right, so I want to make sure we're clear here. Justification is not, is he justified in the death of this young lady? Justification is the justified use of force. So I don't condone any of his actions before the shooting. I don't think that he's a great officer with great reputation, and I'm not supporting him whatsoever. I'm saying that the use of force when she lunged at the police officers with the pot, the use of deadly force was appropriate and justified in that particular instance.
What, say that again?
That when she lunged at the police officers with the pot of boiling water, that Grayson was justified in using deadly force against her.
Okay, so in your, I guess, estimation of what happened, she violently attacked the officer.
No, I didn't say she violently attacked the officer. She picked up the pot and she threw it in the direction of both officers, and out of fear of serious bodily injury, which is a part of the statute requirement, they can utilize deadly force to deter that threat. And that's what Grayson did in that instance, and that's why I believe it's justified.
You know, I could go back and forth with you. I'm going to allow the panelists to opine on this because I'm sure he has something to say. Officer, what say you?
Well, it's interesting. You know, you can't legislate morality, that's for certain. But I'm in all of this, I'm still trying to understand why they were inside the house. It makes no sense to me. If the original call was for a burglar or a suspected prowler, once they've ascertained that that's not the case, why do they need to go inside? They already know that she possibly has mental health issues. To my mind, to my way of thinking, once they established they've satisfied the requirements of the original call, you check on her, ask if she's all right. It's time to code the call to go back in service.
There's a dispute, obviously, of her malicious intent. I don't think there was any malicious intent whatsoever. I believe this woman was in fear of her life. I think she was being told very confusing things in a confused state. And she was then shot and killed. Officer Tatum, I want to go back to you and pose some questions that other cops have posed, similar to what you just heard. There's a white female cop who went on record pretty quickly in uniform and talked about how this officer in particular should have never been a cop, and then she gets into the conduct after this happened. Tatum, why did he lie to his colleagues?
You're talking about in the former incident?
Well, he's been lying. I'm not even talking about the other incidents where we know he lied on police reports, which is official misconduct, violation of oath of office, et cetera. I'm talking about this time. As soon as his colleagues arrived, he told a narrative of an aggressive, violent individual. As a matter of fact, he said she was a crazy B word, all right? That's unprofessional naturally, but it goes to his state of mind, dear brother. In a court of law, that goes to state of mind. If you believe you're dealing with a crazy B word rather than a person experiencing either A, mental health crisis, or B, a possible victim of a potential crime, it goes to your state of mind.
Well, I don't think that's gonna end up being relevant in this case, but I do think it was reprehensible for someone to speak like that.
Why don't you think it's relevant in this case when it's already been deemed relevant? That's why he got indicted.
It's not gonna be relevant. They indicted him, in my opinion, because they wanted to stop the riots from happening. They didn't want people to lose their mind over this shooting that was very emotional. In the court of law, this is gonna be a self-defense argument. So Grayson is gonna argue that he acted in self-defense, and that's the only thing that's gonna be on the table. His previous behavior. Why didn't his partner
respond the same way then?
Well, I think well, first of all, their tactics were terrible. His partner was in a very difficult position to do anything. he almost shot Grayson in the back. So these cops had a lot of things that they did incorrectly, and their tactics were horrible. And I think that's why both of them didn't respond in the same manner. But I think this is going to be a self-defense argument. That's what I'm saying in the court. Not what I feel, not what anybody else thinks, not how horrible this was. It was sad to see the woman lose her life like that.
Of course, he's going to make a self-defense argument if he's pleading not guilty.
No, but that's going to be the argument. Is he's going to argue self-defense, and the prosecution is going to have to prove that he wasn't acting in self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah, we know that.
The burden of proof is not going to be. They're not going to be sufficient in this, given the fact
that's
that
why we have fact checkers called jury members. But let me get this correct. Tatum, you're saying that these cops did everything wrong. They broke protocol. They are bad cops. You don't agree with their actions, but the only thing they got right was killing that woman.
No, that's not what I'm saying whatsoever.
That's basically what you're saying.
I don't think that both cops did everything wrong. I think that Grayson did a lot of things wrong. I would have liked to have seen him de-escalate in that situation. I would have liked to have seen, him do a lot of things differently. Even after he shot her, I would like to see them at least give an attempt to render aid, even though they wasn't going to be able to properly render aid. But I think that being a bad cop doesn't mean that you're not justified in defending yourself against a person hurling boiling water. I think that's what it's going to end up coming down to.
Yeah, I didn't see a hurling of boiling water.
He did. I sent your staff the video that I did. I think we're sending over now. It's a video that I did where I put it in slow motion and I show the trajectory of the pod and the way the water went out and it hit a table. I mean, it hit like a chair and the floor. And so you can see that the water was hurled and propelled in their direction. And that's when he pulled the trigger and shot her. Listen, if she hadn't thrown that water, I think that these cops would, well, at least Grayson would have not have been justified and he would have gotten charged correctly. But I think when she threw that water, he's going to have a justification in the necessity to use deadly force in his self-defense, the defense of himself and his partner.
Taylor. Officer Taylor, what say you to that?
Well, I understand the law and I understand self-defense. And, every day in this country, officers respond to these sort of calls. And I've never heard of hot water being used as a weapon that justifies the use of deadly force. To my way of thinking, they could have mitigated the whole thing. Number one, they didn't have to be inside the residence with her. That's number one. Number two, if they were going to be in the residence, you've got an officer primary and you got a backup officer. If you're so concerned about the possibility of a fire breaking out, and you have this woman who you've already established has mental issues, she's seated. Why not have your partner go and turn the pot off? If it's that big of a deal. Again, I still don't understand why they were both inside the residence asking for her ID.
I can explain.
They're trying to run her for warrants or whatever.
I can explain that. I can explain that. I agree with you that when you look at it after the fact, there's some things that I wish that they would have done differently. But it wasn't unlawful to be in her house at the time of this incident. It seems that when they first engaged with her, it was a call the night before of her struggling with mental illness. That's why Officer Grayson, a Deputy Grayson asked her, was she still struggling with mental illness, because she was kind of being erratic. So on a call that's a prowler call, you have the right to investigate the call and get information from the person who's calling so that you can rectify it, because she did seem like she was struggling from a mental illness encounter. She was also on the phone with another deputy. It seemed like they were trying to get her mental illness situation, I guess put into check, which everything was going fine. They were having a reasonable conversation. They were laughing and joking. Even when she went to the stove, they kind of were joking before she said, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." And so I think that that's where the storyline is going to go in the court of law. They're going to say that everything was fine. Nobody was being intense. Nobody was violating laws. They were acting within the color of their authority. She didn't ask them to leave the house. She didn't say that she felt threatened by them at any point. And everything was fine until she got to the stove. And I'll just give an example of the stove situation. Looking back on it, I think they should have probably asked her. This is what I would have done if I was in a situation, because I don't want her to think I'm overstepping her bounds, and I do want to be cautious to her own living space. So I would have asked her, "Ma'am, would you mind if I turn your stove off because it seems like it's going to catch on fire if we don't do something about it? I do understand how an officer wouldn't want to overstep their bounds and try to start turning stuff off in her house and messing with her appliances. In a reasonable situation, if she'd have went over there and turned the fire off and went back to sit down, that's what everybody would have liked to have seen happen. But it didn't end up that way.
Officer Tatum, I'm going to respond to that, then go to our co-panelist. So the argument is interesting, the contrast between both of you. Because Tatum, you're basically arguing that this is within the statutory framework of law. Now, the reason why
the shooting, only
right,
the shooting.
You're saying that's your argument. The argument that you're making is that this happened within the statutory framework of what is legally allowable, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, here's the problem with that. If you believe that laws equate to morality, dear brother, that means you would have to believe that when it was law that Black people could not sit where they wanted to sit on the bus, that law equated to morality. When Black people could not frequent establishments, could not have the freedom to assemble or the right and access to vote, that was law. That equated to morality. My point to you is, you do not judge, or at least for men like myself, I do not judge a statute or the framework of a judicial ruling in order to determine my morality and ethics as it comes when it comes to people. In addition to that, you're making an argument for the worst among us in policing, and you admit you did not like anything they did. You didn't like none of it. But brother, I hate to bring this home, man. Your mama living, Officer Tatum?
Huh?
Is your mama living?
Yeah, my mama alive.
My mother is not. If somebody did your mother that way in uniform, would you come on my show and defend them?
I'm not defending.
Yes, y'all do, brother. Come on, man.
As if, no, listen, people say like I'm defending it. Like
would
I'm
you
defending
say
this
what
officer.
you're saying if this was your mother?
I would say the same thing.
This way.
I would say the same thing because I'm going off of what the law says. I don't.
You would say
I don't
if they
like
killed your mama.
If this officer shot my mother after she threw a pot of boiling water at him,
going through a mental health episode, they did not follow protocol. They did not de-escalate. You would still come on television in order to debate that they or that cop was still legally in the right.
I'm only debating the law. I don't care for this cop, and I don't think that he did everything right. I think that he would have been probably worse off if he would have shot her the way they've been perpetuating it out in the news, that if she was just standing by the stove, she put her hands up and homeboy shot her because he thought she would throw a pot of boiling water. I mean, he would go to prison for the rest of his life. What I'm saying is that things begin to change when a person throws a pot of boiling water at him. I would have liked to see him do things differently. I would be very upset if that was my mom. I would have been very upset. I wouldn't like. I'm upset that this woman lost her life. I don't think that this should have resulted in that. But the law will dictate certain things when it comes to self-defense. And boiling water is a deadly weapon because a person can get seriously injured, dismembered. I mean, not dismembered, but get seriously injured and disfigured for life.
Sir. It's not considered a deadly weapon. It
is a deadly weapon. According to Illinois law, a boiling pot of water is a deadly weapon.
No, it's not considered. It's considered. No, sir. Look at the ruling, sir. It's not considered.
I know the ruling says, Dr. Ritchie, the ruling says that the water was the deadly weapon and deadly force was justified in that scenario. However, they are arguing that he put himself in a situation that should not necessitate a deadly force. Let me just give you an example.
Brother, let me do this.
Let me just give this quick example real quick.
Tatum, I'm going to let you give me the example, dear brother. But I want you to understand the difference between a deadly weapon, which is categorized by instrumentation, and the use of deadly force. The court made the distinction. You see, the device or the pot itself is not a deadly weapon. They talked about what the officer subjectively believed was the deadly weapon. That was the contextualization of the court, not the category of the pot or of the boiling water. To Officer Taylor, I want you to respond to Tatum, and then we'll go back for Tatum's example. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the law does provide for self-defense. For instance, in the case of an officer chasing an armed person, if that person is going to get to a position of cover and be able to return fire, and the officer is in the open, that officer is justified in shooting this person, okay? Because it's accepted that the officer, through no fault of their own, right, in the performance of their duty, is inadvertently placed in a position of severe disadvantage, right, which could result in severe injury or loss of life. That is mutually understood. It's universally understood. But also, saying that, it's also well known and universally accepted that if an officer is engaged in a gunfight with a person who places themselves in front of a group of citizens, to the extent that there's a possibility that if the officer returns fire, one of those citizens might be injured, then those are just rounds the officer has to eat. And this is basic. This is right out of the academy in Baltimore City, one of the most violent cities in the United States. It's known that if the person has a backdrop that's not safe, where the officer would take the risk of hitting someone, that officer's got to seek cover as best he can until the situation changes. This entire situation was manufactured. He manufactured these exigent circumstances, literally told the woman what he was going to do to her, and then did it. I don't understand any of it. I don't understand what argument he has. I don't understand it at all. I would not want to go to court with this argument. There's no way in the world I would want to do it. I think his partner was very uncomfortable. I think his partner was equally as confused. I mean, this is Derek Chauvin to the nth degree. This is crazy. This is madness.
Tatum?
So yeah, I just want to give the example. In the example that they're giving with this particular officer, they charge him with first-degree murder, which is intentional murder, and it's not going to hold up in court whatsoever. And I wish they would have charged him something a little more appropriate. The example that I was going to give was that,
give me a more appropriate charge.
Well, I think he's going to be found innocent or not guilty because of the self-defense argument.
But you said they would have charged him with something more appropriate.
Well, I'm saying at least be reasonable, right?
But brother, what appropriate charge are you referring to in your mind?
Okay, so there's two arguments here. I think he's going to be justified, but that doesn't mean he can't be charged because people do have concerns about his behavior. I think that something more of, they could have gotten it for manslaughter, maybe second-degree murder, if they want to push it that far, would have been more reasonable. To charge him with first-degree murder is a burden that they're not going to have any chance at proving.
They still have an opportunity to add lesser. Yeah, they have to add lesser offenses.
They have to try to prove premeditation, which is never going to happen in this case because everything was fine before she said, "I rebuke in the name of Jesus," while holding that pot of boiling water, which was the initial aggressive threat. Well, and so he used the threat of deadly force against her.
Let me correct something that you said.
Okay.
The murder statute he's charged under, well, number one, lesser offenses can be added. I actually believe they will be. But the murder charge does not require premeditation in the sense that he went to the home in order to kill. It requires mens rea. And mens rea means that you knew or should have known that killing a woman who is ducking down on the floor in her home was a crime. You develop mens rea at that point, and that is the formation of charge. All right, go ahead, bro.
Well, that he would be guilty if that's what happened. We're all on the same page. If she crouched down and he just shot her because she had a pot next to her, he thought she was going to throw the pot, he would have had no chance in this case. But I think that when she picked the pot up for whatever reason,